Welcome back to Face the Nation. Joining us now is Jay Sekulow, who is on the president's legal team, and he's also chief counsel at the American Center for Law and Justice. Mr. Sekulow, I want to start with this meeting with the president's son. The president said he didn't know about it. Are you confident that the president knows everything about all the meetings his son may or may not have had with any Russians?
Well, I know this. The president was not aware about this meeting, did not participate in this meeting. As far as other meetings go, look, the president has said that he was not aware of it, wasn't involved in it, and there's been no indication otherwise. So when you say other meetings that took place, I'm sure they had conversations during the course of a campaign about meetings that were relevant to some kind of determination, but this one was not. Most meetings were never discussed with the president. I mean, that's normally how these go. So the president was campaigning. His staff was having meetings, and the president was not made aware of this nor participated in this meeting. Is
it possible, as the president's lawyer, to say the president knows of no other meetings with his campaign staff and Russians?
Yeah, the president told me. I mean, obviously, the president has been very clear on that. He said he had no meetings, was aware of no meetings with Russians, was not aware of this one until really right before it all broke. And that's what the president has said. And in fact, there's been no information to the contrary, so he's been very clear on that.
What would be the best thing, as far as for the president's, as the president's lawyer, what would be the best thing that his son could do in terms of answering questions about this meeting?
Well, I think he did it when Donald Trump Jr. did it when he went on Sean Hannity. Look, he released all of the emails, including the entire chain of emails. So that was a lot. And then he went on and explained what happened at the meeting, discussed the nature of the meeting, that it was not based on, it was supposed to be about opposition research, ended up not being on that. The individuals that were involved in the meeting ended up going right down to Washington to still lobby on the Maginski Act. And that whole issue of Russian sanctions. So, again, it was kind of the meeting was under a false pretense in a sense. And I think he was very clear. Donald Trump Jr. answered questions and said he would continue to if needed to.
Would it help the president's case if he testified in front of the Senate Intelligence Committee and others who's asked for him to testify?
Well, that's a conversation that will take place between Donald Trump Jr. and his lawyer. He said he's willing to talk about it. He's willing to testify. I'm not going to get into the particulars of what that testimony would be involved. I'm not his lawyer.
Do you? The AP is reporting that the lobbyist who was in the meeting said that the president's son was given a portfolio of information. Do you know anything about that?
No, I don't. I don't know what information was allegedly left, if any. But the discussion was about the Maginski Act, so it may well, if there was anything, it could have been about the Maginski Act. And he also said he didn't know, the individual that was there, the Russian-American, said he doesn't, I read that same AP report, and he said he doesn't know if there was anything in it. And I don't even know if anything was left, but no knowledge of what that would have been. But again, the conversation was on the Maginski Act.
Let me ask you, as somebody who knows something about national security, you've written about it. Back in June of 2016, leaving aside, there was no question of collusion at that time in the public record, but meeting with somebody who was offered and advertised as an agent of the Russian government, wouldn't that have been something that if you were advising the campaign, you would say, Russia is an enemy of the United States, don't take this meeting?
Well, look, I wasn't their lawyer then. I didn't represent the campaign, and I don't like to look at hindsight on how you do it. Donald Trump Jr. himself said he would do the meeting if he had to do it all over again. There are things he would do differently. So that's how you look at it. I mean, opposition research in campaigns happens all the time. You had the situation with the Ukrainians doing the same thing with the Democratic National Committee in the Clinton campaign. So, again, I don't look at any of this in a vacuum. You look at it at the time, it was in the middle of a campaign. And, again, I'm not their lawyer. I was not the campaign lawyer. I'm not the campaign lawyer. I represent the president. I need to be clear on this. The president's engagement on this was that he was not aware and did not participate in any of this. So I want to be really clear on that. And I appreciate you letting me just say that.
Absolutely. Thanks. But on this question of what people were thinking about the Russians in the summer of 2016, I mean, you wrote a book called The Unholy Alliance about the Russians. Vladimir Putin is on the cover. And so it's not like this is the same as the Ukrainians. This is the previous nominee of the Republican Party said the Russians were America's #1 geopolitical foe. So shouldn't that have raised red flags just from a national security standpoint?
Well, look, I think Don Jr. Addressed that, saying if he was looking at it, he would look at it differently now or handle it differently. But again, at the heat of the campaign, it's easy to be. I'm the lawyer. He's not a lawyer. I deal with the legal issues. He was helping the campaign. So I understand exactly the question you're asking. Look, the president went to Vladimir Putin at the G20 and talked about this. It's not as if the president's not addressing this, and he's addressed it publicly about his concerns with Russian engagement generally, and he asked Putin about it twice.
Let me ask you, when we last talked, you said the president is not under investigation. Is that still your case, and how do you know it to be the case?
Well, we've had no notification from the special counsel. Nothing's changed since James Comey said 3 times to the president that he was under investigation. We've had nothing to the contrary since then.
And nothing from any of the Senate investigative committees that would suggest the president is under investigation?
Correct. Nothing to the president at all.
All right, Jay Sekulow, thanks so much for being with us, and we'll be right back. And we're back with our panel. Susan Page of USA Today, Jeffrey Goldberg of The Atlantic, Ed O'Keefe of The Washington Post, and Ramesh Ponnuru of National Review. Susan, I want to start with you. Before this revelation, when we talked to White House officials about any connection between Russia and any Trump officials, they said, almost, how dare you even ask the question? This is a smear to suggest that anybody would have been connected at all. The vice president reacted that way, so did Kellyanne Conway. Because for them, it was out of bounds, the whole notion. Now that there is proof that the president's son was anxious to go to a meeting with someone who was advertised as a Russian agent, well, no big deal. That seems hard to switch that quickly.
It's such a big lie to say we did that, but now you found out we did that, and it's just not a big deal. Yes, I think that's a hard needle to thread, and it puts people like Mike Pence in a terrible situation because he has misrepresented something that we now know, we assume unknowingly. Think about the position it puts congressional Republicans in, who the White House wants to defend them on this issue and help them on other issues. And yet even Jay Sekulow seems very reluctant to get out very far ahead in responding to your questions because no one is quite sure what is going to turn up next week.
And Ramesh, let me ask you, the president said, well, anybody would have taken this meeting. I would guess that some Kellyanne Conway, Sean Spicer, Reince Priebus, I'm not sure they would have taken a meeting with somebody advertised as a Russian government agent.
Well, you know, one thing that's been really notable is that you don't have campaign officials from previous Republican campaigns coming forward and say, yes, this is routine. We took meetings like this all the time. Nobody from McCain world or Romney world or George W. Bush world is saying anything of the type because, in fact, it's highly unusual. What you are not getting, though, interestingly, is a unified public line from the strong supporters of the president. Some of them are saying, nothing to see here, no big deal, this is totally appropriate. Some of them are saying it was inappropriate, sure, but everybody does it. Some of them are saying Donald Trump Jr. was somehow set up. There is a complete cacophony. They have not managed to, maybe they were trying to coordinate with the Russians, they're not coordinating with one another.
It is also, Jeffrey, interesting to see, I mean, it was Mitt Romney's position about the Russians as far back as the last election, that they were the #1 geopolitical foe, and that now to see some people arguing, not that big a deal, that, you know, Russians, well, they're just like the Ukrainians, but they weren't at this point in 2016.
Well, something's happened on the right in America in which Putin has been reimagined and Russia's been reimagined as a stalwart Christian nation opposing radical Islam. That was not Jay Sekulow's viewpoint as of last year, by the way. But there is a counter movement in certain circles of the right that says Russia is our natural ally. And this obviously is in Russia's best interest to have this argument. It is certainly not, it certainly has not been a mainstream Republican argument, which is why most Republicans would have said, really, you want me to meet with a Russian agent during a campaign? You got to be kidding.
I mean, this is starting to calcify now among devoted Republicans. While 60% of Americans now think Russia tried to influence the election in the new Washington Post ABC poll out this morning, and 44% think Trump benefited directly from that attempt. If you look at Republicans, the number of them, or Republican-leaning independents who think the Russians sought to influence the election and that the Trump team intentionally helped, has dropped to just 9% of Republicans. So a majority of them now are on the president's side, think that all of this is just designed to discredit him from a partisan perspective. Well, the rest of the country is like, no, there's just some real serious problems here. That's why Jay Sekulow feels he can come out here, pull what is now known as the full Sekulow, show up on all the shows this morning defending the president, and say what he's saying because he knows that the president's base is still with him. And there's nothing that has come out yet that really
We'll change that.
pokes at that at all.
Let's go back to policy and the things people care about in their daily lives, Susan Page, and that's this health care bill. It's now been delayed a week. Is Senator Paul right that this will cause more people to drop off? How do you think this will play out?
So we're waiting for Senator McCain to get better and come back down. He's not said he's going to vote for this bill. He hasn't said he'll even support the motion to proceed to allow the debate to go forward. I mean, that's in what trouble this bill is. It's not inconceivable that it would pass, but no bill with this low of support with the public no major bill has ever been enacted in U.S. history since we started polling. It's just very hard to get members of Congress looking at their own reelection in many cases next year to put themselves on the line for a bill that is so unpopular and unpopular, not supported even by a majority of Republicans. And the really bad news, it seems to me, for President Trump is this is his sweet spots politically. He still has the support of people who voted for him. He still has Republican control of the House and the Senate. There may become a time in a year where that is no longer the case.
Ramesh, why is this so hard?
Well, it's hard because, for one thing, there are only 52 Republican senators. There were 60 Democratic senators at the time that Obamacare passed, and so it's just going to be hard. You need almost every single Republican vote. Republicans have tried to rush this through, and they've repeatedly found that they need more time to get it through. And then one last thing. Because it's sort of a cobbled together piece of legislation, nobody actually loves it. Yeah. There's nobody who's out there day in, day out making the case for it, pushing back widespread misrepresentations of it the way that other major legislation of this type usually has.
It's an orphan bill, as our colleague Paul Kane put it this week in a column. And look, Susan Collins this morning, Rand Paul suggested it, John McCain suggested it Friday before this news came out. They want to see this go back to regular order. Send it back, which means putting it back in the committees and letting them hash it out in public and let it drag out the way Schoolhouse Rock tells us it's supposed to happen. And the reason is they believe they've seen the failure of the Affordable Care Act and the fact that it was put together just by Democrats. They know, I talk to them on a regular basis, that there are Democrats out there who want to work with Republicans on this and vice versa, on prescription drug prices, on the access to this, on allowing people to buy across state lines. And there are proposals to do that. It's just they haven't been given the space and the time and the authority to do it.
Jeffrey, what's your assessment of the president's role here? He is our first marketer president. Or, that may not be true, but he is that is his key skill.
He would like you to say that, I guess.
He has been successful in private business because he is such a great marketer.
He sells.
And so what's the...
Well, this is one of the mysteries at the heart of this whole episode is this. Why is he more or less AWOL? And I think it is a mystery. I don't think we understand everything about this. But I would say that there's a very good chance that he and his people don't want him out there talking about it because he isn't really good at talking about it and would get trapped in the details. I think that's one. I also think, and this is pure speculation, but I think that he's probably ambivalent about this bill and the nature of it and the idea. I mean, he might actually believe the CBO scoring. His people around him officially don't believe it, but he might believe it. And it goes to the even larger question about the missed opportunities of the first 6 months of this administration, which is here's a man who's not really a Republican, doesn't owe that much to the party, is not a Democrat either, can legislate, can lead in a populist way, hasn't done infrastructure, hasn't expanded medical care for the kind of people who voted for him. There's a lot of mysteries inside this mystery.
Pick up on that, Susan. I am struck that one of the things they put in the Senate bill is some more money for the opioid crisis. The president campaigned on that. When you think of the forgotten man that he talked about in his inaugural address, what you don't hear so much is people saying, boy, we tried to talk to the president about something else, but he kept coming back to the forgotten man. And what is this bill going to do for the forgotten man? And let's keep the focus on that. This was something that had to be added in by the Senate. It seems that the thing that brought him to Washington is not his primary focus in terms of this legislation.
But I don't think his primary focus are the details and repercussions of the legislation. No, I think he just wants a bill to sign. What has he said several times? I have my pen in hand and I'm ready for them to send me a bill and I'll sign it. Not, I have a plan in mind that I think is important to fix the American health system. And you ask, Ramesh, why healthcare is hard. Healthcare is hard because there are trade-offs. Everybody doesn't win on healthcare. If you're going to cover more people, it's going to cost more. If you're going to have equal treatment for people with pre-existing conditions, it means healthy people are going to pay more. That's the trade-off that we continue to have trouble with as a nation in figuring out what exactly we want to do.
Ramesh, let me just ask you a quick question about repercussions. if the Republicans don't repeal the Affordable Care Act after 7 years, isn't that something that they have to worry about in terms of political backlash?
I think it becomes intensely demoralizing to Republicans, even if those Republicans don't, as I said, love this bill, to hear that the Republicans haven't done anything on it. And I think that the great danger they face going into the midterms, that any party does facing midterm elections when they're in power in the White House, is that they've got a demoralized base and the other side is revved up.
And what about the rest of the Republican agenda? Is this like a train? You can't go anywhere if the first car
Pretty
crashes?
much, and it's incredible how a one-track-minded Congress has become. Well, the House is working on some, there's a big defense bill that has to get done, and they're starting to think about a spending plan by the end of September. There are a lot of big things that need to get done. There's only about 21 days left on the House calendar, 37 on the Senate calendar by the end of September when all of these things come due. That's part of why McConnell decided to extend the summer recess into August this week. John McCain was part of the reason that happened. He wants to get his defense bill that he oversees as head of the Armed Services Committee done as a way to demonstrate that they're doing something. And yet now, because of his surgery, they may have to stick around even longer.
Finally, to you, Jeffrey, the president said he would be angry if this doesn't pass. What do you think the president's reaction will be if it doesn't pass?
He'll just move on to make America great again. I mean, remember, he'll find a way to blame the media. He'll find a way to blame the Democrats. I don't think his heart is in this. It is an amazing moment, and I think this is where he will feel personally insulted and betrayed by the Republicans. Republican president, Republican House, Republican Senate cannot undo Obamacare. Really, he'll be judged as having an historically bad first year. Put aside Russia, put aside everything else.
Okay. We're going to have to leave it there, I'm afraid. I want to thank our panel. We'll be back in a moment with a look at the first mission to the moon, Apollo 8. We turn now to space. 1968 was a traumatic year for America. The Vietnam War was raging, riots and unrest plagued political conventions, and the assassinations of Dr. Martin Luther King and Robert F. Kennedy shook an already weary nation to the core. The end of that year, though, gave reason to hope.
3, 2, 1, 0.
NASA's Apollo 8 mission successfully launched 3 astronauts into space, beating the Soviets to become the first manned flight to leave the Earth's orbit, circle the moon, and return safely. It was a breakthrough that stunned the world. Joining us now is Jeffrey Kluger, a science editor and senior writer at Time magazine, and the author of Apollo 8, a new book that looks back at that seminal mission. Jeffrey, welcome. Put Apollo 8 in context for us with all the different missions. Why is it so important?
Well, here's the thing. I mean, it's important culturally. As we said at the beginning of the segment, this was the most tragically blood-soaked year in modern human and global history. We had all of these terrible events. There was the Tet Offensive. And at the same time, 3 American astronauts had been lost in a spacecraft fire just the year before, in 1967. Ed White, Gus Grissom, and Roger Chaffee. The space program, which had been our talisman, our charm, was suddenly moved out of reach. And then here we were in the summer of 1968. There was no plausible way that we were going to make President Kennedy's deadline of getting men on the moon before 1970. And the guys at NASA said, you know what? You know our schedule, let's forget our schedule. Let's kickstart this thing, let's put this spacecraft on top of this unproven rocket, and let's get 3 guys out to orbit the moon before the end of the year, on Christmas Eve, no less.
It's amazing that after especially the accident,
Right.
that they would not be risk averse.
Right.
And why not only were they not risk averse, they, as you said, sped up the mission.
Well, and I think what was going on there, you're absolutely right. They could not abide losing any other people, but they also had an intuitive faith in the men and women of NASA. And we should remember the women. Hidden Figures reminds us of this. They knew that they had the resolve, that they had the wherewithal, they had the monomaniacal commitment to make these machines work and make this mission work. And I think that says something about America then and America now. As President Kennedy said, we choose to go to the moon. We simply elected to do a great transcendent thing, and we did it.
How much a part of that was, well, break the component parts down for me in terms of that commitment, because we'll bring it to the present in a moment. But I mean, obviously the Cold War added some spur to the
That's right.
to the movement. But what else was at play that created this this sense of risk tolerance and this big long shot they took?
Well, I think it was that the Cold War was very much in some ways a kabuki war. Now, you don't call nuclear warheads kabuki. They're very real, but it was all about symbolism. So they knew this is a way to plant our flag, to establish to the world that a free culture, that a capitalist culture is able to do something preposterously wonderful. And I think something about the crew said it too. Frank Borman, the commander, he was a Cold Warrior, a deeply patriotic American. He was flying out there to punch the Russians in the nose. Jim Lovell was flying for the sheer joy of flight. Lovell was never as happy as when he was in space, and never as happy in space as when he was doing something crazy. And Bill Anders, the third guy, the rookie, he loved the machines. He loved the lunar cartography. He was there for the granular work. It was the perfect combination of three guys.
Give us a little sense, if you can, about the technology here. I mean, what it was like to, compared to what we know today, where we have a world where everything seems possible. What was the technology like that sent them there?
Well, we saw this in the movie Apollo 13. This was slide rule technology. This was sharpened pencil technology. The computer on board the spacecraft, one of the great selling points was that it had a screen, and the screen was capable of displaying 30 complete digits at a time. 30. That was state of the art.
It's not even a tweet.
It's not even a tweet. That's exactly right. It's probably 118 characters or something. So they went on old school sort of science. And Jim Lovell, the navigator, he navigated by the stars. He would take a rough alignment on 3 stars and then slowly refine the alignment until they knew where they were going.
Compare it to today, because the notion now is bureaucrats, how could they ever do something like this? Why do we go to the... Where is this innovation, this sense of risk-taking now in the government sphere? Well,
that's what's challenging. The government has become so partisan and dysfunctional that this kind of thing is impossible. It's important to remember that the lunar program spanned 4 presidencies, 2 Democrats, 2 Republicans. It spanned 6 Congresses. And yes, I think the Democrats were in control of all of them, but the majorities changed. The feuds were there. But the country was obsessively focused on this one nonpartisan, indeed surpassing partisan goal to get to the moon before a certain deadline. And we did it.
All right, Jeffrey Kluger, thank you so much. A fascinating, wonderful book, and we really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
And we'll be back in a moment. That's it for us today. Thanks for watching. You can keep up with the news of the week by subscribing to the Face the Nation Diary podcast. Find us on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform. Until next week, for Face the Nation, I'm John Dickerson.